Up+Adam.
Tractor systems are offline.
We are Beyond FM.
Beyond FM.
The future of broadcasting is here.
Up+Adam with Adam Montiel. It's community content from Concentrate. It's Up+Adam with Adam Montiel.
Some say life is where it begins. Straight to the stars is where it ends. Yes, some say life is just where it begins. Straight to the stars is where it ends. Only to start again.
Happy Hump Day. Thank you so much for being Up+Adam. My name is Adam Montiel. Fun show today. Talking nostalgia. Maria Garcia, she has a gift for taking the stuff we all grew up with. The songs, the celebrities, the movies, the weird little cultural moments we thought were just entertainment, and showing us that they may have been telling us something about ourselves the whole time. She's got a new podcast called Muy Excited. It looks at pop culture through the lens of memory, history, human behavior, from Ricky Martin to Britney Spears to, yes, even Chihuahuas. And what I love about it is this isn't just a nostalgia trip. Maria wants to know why certain things stay with us, why some memories get softer with time, and what the culture we consumed says about who we were then and who we are now. Coming up, Maria and I will talk about why pop culture may be one of the most honest historical records we have, how nostalgia can beautify the past and kind of distort it at the same time. What happens when your kid has no idea why somebody from your generation was a huge deal, and why the things we love deserve to be taken seriously. It's smart, fun, surprising, a very human chat. Maria Garcia, host of Muy Excited, is coming up in just a few minutes on Up+Adam. All right, a couple headlines here. If you are shopping the housing market, there are a few bad words that might immediately turn you off. And a big one, we've all heard it, and we've seen like the lawyer commercials over it, asbestos, right? Of course, asbestos wasn't considered scary before the 70s and 80s. People online are debating now what things from modern times, from today, might end up becoming today's asbestos. You know what I mean? When you're looking back a few decades from now. And some of the top responses pretty interesting. Number one is they say microplastics and PFAs, even though there's already concern over those. So like, it seems to me something like asbestos is going to just like all of a sudden be like, what? That was, that's bad now. Polyester clothing was on this list due to microplastic pollution. Scented air fresheners, laundry scented boosters. Oh my God, wouldn't that be the thing if we found out those were like super dangerous? All the lint that dispenses, disperses, maybe is the better word, like into the air when you clear out that lint dryer trap. Some folks were saying energy drinks are going to be those things that later on we talk about that were massively dangerous for us. Spray foam insulation, silica dust from building materials, brake dust was on this list from vehicles, brake pads. Now keep in mind, these are just things that people are submitting that what could become today's, quote, asbestos. Peptides. You're hearing a lot about that lately, especially unregulated, like gray market peptides with like no clinical studies. We don't even know like what the long-term effects are. Plastic water pipes, which are super common now. Growth hormones in things like chickens and other farm animals. What else was on this list that I thought was worthy? Teflon coating in pans was on there. Triclosan. It's a chemical ingredient with antibacterial properties that's been added to a lot of personal care products, including like mouthwashes, lotions, creams. Data centers, those are new. GLP-1s was on this list. Things like Ozempic. What if we find out later? I mean, 40% of the people are on those now. So but I mean, again, asbestos was something that was everywhere. Disposable lithium batteries. I don't know. Spray sunscreens. Pickleball. That was funny. It was on this list. Of course, it doesn't belong there. But just really most likely it'll be something that no one thinks about and is just accepted that you probably don't even know is a thing till like 30 years down the line, some random component that they started adding to TVs actually causes it to shoot cancer beams into your eyes. And it's going to be one of those things. I just don't know. But I thought what an interesting conversation to get into the whole thing about what's going to be today's asbestos. All right. Serious question, but kind of light question. And be honest, how many times do you typically use a bath towel before washing it? Over 24,000 Americans were polled. The number one answer was 2 or 3 times. 40% of folks rather agreed, but here's where it gets weird. The second most popular answer, with 20% of the vote, was washing it after 4 or 5 uses. I think after about 4, maybe 4, but for sure 5, it's going to smell a little bit like a used towel, right? 10% of people won't wash their towel until 5 or 6 uses, and another 10% won't throw it in the washer until 7 or more times. When does the shower become pointless if you keep drying yourself off with what is, is it a dirty towel? It's really not a dirty towel because you're clean when it's being used. I know we call it a dirty towel because it's just been wet and air dried so many times that it starts to smell kind of funky, kind of mildewy, kind of, it's got that smell. So I don't know. This is an interesting poll. For the clean freaks out there, I saw this, the 13% of people wash it every use. Man, if you're doing the laundry, that's a lot of work. Seems excessive, but nothing beats that fresh towel feeling. That is for sure. Especially like right out the dryer. You do that. Okay, a couple little nuggets of good news. We love, news headlines are just so depressing. And when you have a news story that makes you feel good, bring it. I've got 2 of them for you. Today is World Elephant Day, and there's good news for elephants from a new study out of South Africa. They found that elephants released into the wild after years in captivity are adapting really well to life on wildlife reserves. Researchers followed 11 formerly captive elephants over 5 years, found they behaved a lot like wild elephants. Totally normal stress levels. That's great to hear. We want our elephant friends to be happy once they're getting back into the wild. Finally, this is a really touching story. A teenager in Utah he's got to be like 13 because he looks young, and you'll hear his voice. His voice hasn't even popped yet. This kid in Utah spent nearly 300 hours of his summer building a custom 3D printed wheelchair for a 21-month-old girl who has some issues, and I guess knew about her in the community. His name is Zach Waters. He's 13. He designed the chair with pink accents, removable cup holders, trays, storage space for medical equipment. He also made the footrest and headrest adjustable so the wheelchair can grow with the little girl over time. I think I got a little bit of audio from this. Listen to this. It's really, really sweet.
It combines my 2 favorite things, 3D printing and helping people in need. It makes me so happy to print it and see the smiles and how happy the family is that really need the wheelchair.
I love that. Good for you, buddy. Way to go, Zach. All right, before we get into our chat with Maria Garcia, it's going to be a fun one. I want to tell you about my friends at Benny's Pizza. If you got no plans for happy hour tonight, 4:30 to 6:30 every Monday through Friday, you could check out Benny's Pizza, $3.50 domestic cans, $2 off premium beer and wines, plus food specials that certainly hit the spot. They got that incredible Detroit-style pizza, that thick, crispy, pan-fried crust, sauce on top, bottom. Who cares? It's all good. Call them up, 439-3838. Again, let me get that right, 439-3838. They're on Upper Monterey, downtown SLO, 1601 Monterey Street, San Luis Obispo, Benny's Pizza.
It's Up+Adam with Adam Montiel.
All right, Maria Garcia is the kind of storyteller who can take something you thought you already knew, a song, a celebrity, a movie, a moment from your childhood, and make you see it completely differently. She's the creator behind the acclaimed Anything for Selena, also My Devo, and now her new podcast called Muy Excited takes on pop culture, takes on nostalgia, memory, and the stories that we carry with us long after we think we've moved on. That's the point. We think we've moved on. It's smart, fun, curious, and surprisingly human. Really excited to meet you, Maria. Thank you for being Up+Adam.
Oh, thank you so much, Adam. I'm so excited to be here with you today.
Yeah, this is going to be fun, and there's something underneath this whole show that I love. History tells us what we're supposed to remember. Nostalgia tells us what we actually did. And a song in somebody's mom's car or a ridiculous commercial, an artist on MTV, sometimes that stuff marks us more permanently than the things society labels as important. Do you think pop culture is actually one of our most honest historical documents? Because unlike history books, Maria, we didn't really know we were creating evidence when we were living in it.
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree with that statement. We will remember all kinds of random things about pop culture, but when we really focus in on them, we realize they're not random, right? They say something about where we were in our lives when we discovered that song or that movie or that show. They reveal something about ourselves. They reveal something about society, no matter how frivolous or silly they may seem. Pop culture is how we work out as a society, frankly, and how we wrestle with these bigger themes around love and relationships and belonging and being human in this world. Because ultimately, like storytelling, is the most human thing that you can do. Consuming stories, paying attention to stories, telling stories. Humans have been doing it for time immemorial, in caves and around fires and at bedtime. It's the most human thing you can do, no matter how silly those stories may feel in a song or in a show or in a movie. And so Muy Excited is never about shaming our curiosity, but um, following it to see where it takes us.
I love that. There's this fantastic little moment in your Ricky Martin episode. You're watching someone who carries all this history for our generation, the Latin explosion, assimilation, sexuality, belonging, all of it. And your 11-year-old son basically goes, "Who's that?" I love that because one kid can puncture an entire generation's mythology with like 2 words. What happens to an icon when the generation that needed them no longer automatically knows that they mattered? And as his mom, did you suddenly feel less like a fan in that moment and more like this keeper of a cultural memory and be like, oh, I got to explain why this mattered to him now?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I was like, oh my gosh, okay. All right, let's sit down and let me tell you some cultural history here. Because yeah, that moment in the Super Bowl was so powerful to see him singing this song in Spanish, the song that from Bad Bunny's catalog that's a bit subversive. Um, and knowing how far he's come, no matter who you are, whether you are Latino or not, whether you listen to Ricky Martin's music or not, whether you cared about him or not, everybody, I genuinely believe, has something to glean from Ricky Martin's story, because ultimately his story is about something so universal, which is how to live authentically in a world that projects these expectations from you, and expects you to be something and someone you are not. He really lived a public life with this expectation that he had to be this sort of sexy, seductive Latin lover, that he had to be seductive and seduce women, when really inside he was sort of the opposite of that. That's not who he really was, and his life is really about what it takes to shed society's expectations of you and live authentically.
Yeah. I want to talk about nostalgia for a second because nostalgia has incredible lighting. Everything gets softer around the edges. We remember the song, the outfit, where we were, but we don't always remember the world surrounding it accurately. As a journalist, what's more, what's more igniting to you? What's more interesting to you? Is it proving that our nostalgia was right? Or is it maybe discovering that we've been remembering something wrong for 20 years?
I think it's discovering what nostalgia is saying about us. Um, that's ultimately what it's about. And what I say us, I mean both the individual and the collective. And an example of this for to give you an example is we have an episode coming up about Britney Spears and her, I would say, infamous 2003
Hmm.
VMA performance. And this is the performance that got, completely panned by the press. I mean, there were some really horrible things that were said about Britney Spears, but I'm 41 now, right? I was 15 years old in the year 2000. I feel that, you know, in the early aughts, I obviously I was an adolescent and all of this seemed very normal to me. But now, as a 41-year-old mother, looking back at this, I have the life experience and I would, a little bit of wisdom that shows me, this was a time that was incredibly charged with a very specific and insidious kind of sexism in which people spoke about women's bodies in a really poisonous way. That now I'm like, oh, that could be partially why my 15-year-old self felt a certain way, about my body and why my friends spoke about themselves the way they did because we didn't realize it, but we were consuming all of this media that was so incredibly harsh. And we live at a time, where people are saying all kinds of stuff, but I would venture to say that even now we don't speak about women's bodies the way we were in the early 2000s. And I think there's more sensitivity around that. There's more education around that as a society. And so this episode is really about who owes Britney an apology? It's about like justice for Britney Spears. But it's full of nostalgia, right? Because I love Britney and I loved her music, but it also reveals something about the collective us as a society and
Hmm.
who we were at that moment in history, who we were. Um, and how it affected us individually, like young women and young people. So that episode is really fun too. There's a lot of nostalgia, but ultimately I'm trying to figure out like what that nostalgia is pointing to, what it
Mm.
reveals about who we were at that time and who we are now.
I love that you bring up Britney Spears because it kind of leads into my next question because you've spent your career giving enormous intellectual and emotional weight to things that people might dismiss as fandom. Britney, look, Selena, Juan Gabriel, pop music, celebrity, and now, nostalgic culture. Who decided that the things ordinary people love aren't serious subjects?
That's a great question. Let's put them on trial.
Yeah, right.
Why decide
Well,
that?
do you think dismissing pop culture has sometimes been another way of dismissing the people, the women, Latinos, working class families whose lives were definitely reflected in it?
Oh, absolutely. Right. I think dismissing pop culture comes from this sense of elitism and this idea that there's real culture, right? That there's highbrow culture, and then there's lowbrow culture. There's culture in small caps, and I just don't believe that. I don't subscribe to that. Culture is culture, no matter what it is. Your video game that you're playing, um, the ancestral songs you sing to your children, the soap operas that that your grandmother watched in the 80s, like all of that is culture and all of that deserves to be studied because all of it says something about us, and what was important to us and what were the norms and what we valued at that time. And so yeah, I've always, I started my career in hard news, covering sort of accountability, policy reporting. And I think there's obviously tremendous value in that in our society. But what I like to do is I like to take the tools of rigorous journalism and apply it to culture, pop
Mm.
and otherwise, and make meaning. I don't want to just tell you a story, but I want to leave you with the takeaway about what that story could mean. And I want you to finish each episode feeling a little more enlightened, feeling like you left with some revealing knowledge about humanity.
Mhm. With Selena, you went looking for kind of looking at this icon and found pieces of yourself. With Juan Gabriel, that became even more explicit. Mexican identity, home, family, queerness. There's a pattern here. Maria starts investigating someone else, and Maria somehow ends up in the evidence. At what point did you realize the subject of your work wasn't really celebrity at all? It was belonging.
Oh, that's a wonderful question. I think that it happened for the first time with anything for Selena. Before that, I was covering arts and culture, so visual arts and performing arts in Boston. And when I started working on anything for Selena, my editor at the time told me, what makes this interesting for me is how you feel so connected to this. And I want to know like what motivates you to cover this. And as somebody who grew up, doing hard news, and I was like, what? Me in the story? No, that feels weird. I'm not sure I want to do that. But as soon as I started writing and researching and reporting, I realized like, oh my gosh, if I'm going to be honest with our listeners, if I'm going to tell this story as truthfully as I possibly can, I have to be completely transparent about that I'm not just some objective narrator. And there's no such thing as objectivity for me in this. I love Selena. I'm deeply invested in preserving her legacy. I'm deeply invested in doing her legacy justice, and so I had to be very real and with our listeners about what it meant for me. And also, as soon as I started reporting, and for example, when I went to go speak with her dad, Abraham, who was famously guarded, rest in peace, Abraham Quintanilla, it made me think of my own dad and my own complicated relationship with fatherhood. And I had to be very real with our audience about where I was coming from. And I think that's something that stayed in my work. And with Muy Excited, I still do that. There's a lot of personal anecdotes in there. I'm very uh, honest about, how I feel about each story, because I think my listeners deserve that kind of truthfulness.
You're not just a host, you're an executive editor. You've spent years shaping other people's stories, deciding what stays, what goes, when a moment has earned a silence, when somebody needs another question. When Maria Garcia interviews Maria Garcia during the editing process, right? Which Maria is harder to please?
Oh, wow, what a question. Well, thankfully in this project, I have an editor. And so I'm not just sort of editing myself. But one of the things that I love doing, my first love is storytelling. But there's a lot of ways to contribute to storytelling. And so as the leader of our podcast studio, it's my absolute pleasure to also guide other creatives and other um, writers in their own passion projects. We have one project coming out in September called Reaching Out, which is a beautiful memoir about a man who's been looking for his biological father for years and what that search means for him. And it just won the Audio Memoir Award at the Tribeca Festival. And in projects like that, I'm the editor, right? And I'm sort of guiding someone else through it. And I think the fact that I'm also like a writer at heart helps me support other writers. And then in terms of, who's harder to please, I think I used to be sort of like tormented about writing, and I used to fuss over every little sentence. And, I think rigor is healthy, but with Muy Excited, like, I ultimately am doing it for the pleasure of it all, because it's pleasurable for me to research chihuahuas, because it's pleasurable for me to make meaning of Ricky Martin's legacy. And so I'm really just like enjoying the ride and feeling really grateful that I get to do this and share the work um, with an audience that seems really interested in it.
We have this phrase, the good old days, right? And it feels harmless until you start asking, wait, good for whom? Where is the line between nostalgia and mythology, between remembering something lovingly and then editing the past into a version that never actually existed?
That's a great question. I do think that there is a risk to that, mythologizing the past in our culture and aggrandizing it to a point of factual inaccuracy. And I think that's why I really value the tools of journalism, rigorous fact checking, expansive research, editing, right? Having an editor check you and be like, I don't know about this. The writing feels a bit heavy-handed here. And having those checks and balances in the actual process. The process has to be really sound, um, if you want to gain the trust of your audience. Um, and then, you know, so there's the process to curb you from venturing into sort of mythology. But then there's also this sort of acknowledgement that um, human history is, in a way, the history of people mythologizing their past. Like that's inherent to who we are as civilizations. That's why we have these epics. That's why Christopher Nolan can put out the Odyssey and it still makes a huge splash because ultimately like humans want myth. They want story because that's how we work out these very real themes that we wrestle with, the meaning of life, the meaning of relationships, who we are to each other, how we show up to each other. We all make meaning of these, not just through real factual stories, but through human myths, like through mythology. So it's both like acknowledging and respecting mythology for the place that it has in human history and civilization. But also, in our storytelling, acknowledging when it is mythology and then acknowledging when it's fact,
Yeah.
and differentiating those two with a really sound fact-checking process.
Finally, Maria, there's something powerful about creating a space where Latino audiences can hear themselves reflected without everything being translated, explained, or softened, right, for somebody else. But at the same time, great cultural storytelling can become universal because it gets specific, I think. So who is Muy Excited really for? And how do you protect that sense of cultura for the communities that immediately recognize themselves in it while still casting a wide enough net that somebody outside the culture hears it and goes, oh, I know that feeling too?
Yeah. I've always been a believer that specificity breeds universality, and that if you are specific in your own experience and authentic to your own experience, there's going to be something very essentially human that's going to show up in your work that's going to feel very universal to people outside of your culture, to people outside of your communities. Anything for Selena is all about my very culturally specific upbringing, right? As somebody who grew up on the US-Mexico border. But I heard from so many people of all different cultures and backgrounds who related to that, right? And who even if they were not Mexican American, even if they were not Latinos, even if they didn't grow up in the American Southwest, like who grew up like across the world or across the country in a completely different culture, who identified with some of the larger themes I spoke about. And so, ultimately, like I'm being true to myself and transparent about, you know, the place in the world that I come from and how that shapes the lens through which I tackle stories. But I want this show ultimately to be very human. And in a world of where AI is being shoved down all of our throats, and so many of our communities are wondering about the data centers around us, and storytelling is the most human thing you could do. And I want people of all cultural backgrounds to find something in my work that feels true to them.
Yeah. Oh, I'm AI. Look, I got 7 fingers. Look at that. It's crazy. Maria, this was such a joy. I really love the way that you take culture seriously without ever taking the fun out of it. Muy Excited is smart. It's warm. It's such a great reminder that the things we love often tell us who we are. I really appreciate you spending time with me here. Thank you so much for being Up and Adam, Maria.
Oh, Adam, thank you so much. Your questions were so smart and insightful, and it really was truly such a joy to be with you. Thank you so much.
Some say life's where it begins. Straight to the stars is where it ends. Only to start again.
Podcast Muy Excited with Maria Garcia, available wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, we got them links in the show notes. Got to get to Mountain Air, San Luis Obispo. I'm overdue for a visit there. Love what they're doing. They've been around over 50 years, doing it right. Great neighbors, Josh and Lindsay Herring. Follow them on social media too. It's completely free to throw them a follow, and they're really clever in some of the stuff they're doing there. And what are they about? Well, they're helping locals get outside. That's simply put, hiking, camping, climbing, headed to the snow, whatever it is, that's what they're all about doing. And when you go in there, you feel seen, you feel recognized. It's not overwhelming. It's not transactional like it is around the corner at the big box store, REI. They do it so well. And they're just so organic in the way of their approach. They're great neighbors. Check them out, themountaineer.com. A couple doors down, they got their store, The Switchback. That's, you can buy and sell used gear. Maybe you're getting into a new hobby, getting out of one. Check out theswitchback.com. Also, themountaineer.com. The Mountain Air, San Luis Obispo. Make sure you thank them for being Up and Adam. All right, I think we're good. On housekeeping, want to thank our friends Moonshine Collective for being original music on this show called Start Again. Check them out wherever you get your music, stream them wherever. Also, moonshinecollective.com for the latest. Tickets to their second Under the Moon concert series, because the first one this Friday sold out. Check it out. This show, of course, recorded at my SlowCal studios in the heart of San Luis Obispo County, California. SlowCal. Where the wine is world class, the people are real, and life is too beautiful to rush. For turns well taken, visit slowcal.com. That's SLOCAL, slowcal.com. All right, till tomorrow. Hope you have a fantastic day. Great day. You deserve it. I'm Adam Montiel. Thanks again for being Up and Adam.
Some say life's where it begins. Straight to the stars is where it ends. Only to start again. Let's start again. We'll start again. Let's start again.